My name's Mark. What I'd like to do is to give a presentation. I've given it a couple of times. That goes into a bit more depth around the thinking and the theory around the project, the Wellbeing Protocol project. There's a 6-minute pitch on YouTube, which was done at Parliament as part of the Creative HQ NZ GovTech Accelerator program, but there's a slightly longer, deeper view around the background to the project. So that's the agenda. I'll go around the background, the problem, solution space, solution, what next? We won't have a Q&A as this is a one-way presentation. So I won't spend too much time on this, but I've been involved in the blockchain and decentralization space for many years. I was executive director of the Blockchain Association, founded Blockchain Labs, presented, written books, co-authored reports, presented all over the world, ran the first university course on DAOs at Victoria last year, and I'm one of the founding members of Metacartel Ventures, one of the first legal DAOs in the world. We've now got funds under our control around, it's gone up a little bit now, it's at now 28 million US dollars. Okay, but this is a story about the project which has involved a whole lot of other people. So it's been a conversation I've had, and a whole bunch of people have provided input. So this is a town called Frome, I think it's pronounced Frome, in Somerset in the UK. In 2018, the results of a 3-year experiment were released. This data indicated one of the most dramatic medical breakthroughs of recent decades, with the potential to transform treatment regimes, save lives, and save the health system a fortune. These are some of the results. While across the whole of Somerset, emergency hospital admissions rose by 29% during that 3-year period. In Frome, they fell by 17%, so a huge difference between Frome and the neighbouring areas. One of the quotes from one of the physicians: no other interventions on record have reduced emergency admissions across a population. But was this a drug, a device, some sort of new surgical procedure? No. It was actually the result of an intervention called community. It turns out that when isolated people who have health problems are supported by community groups of volunteers, the number of emergency admissions to hospitals falls spectacularly. But this peer-reviewed study, like many similar ones across the globe, haven't had a dramatic effect on our Western health system. Why not? So to understand why, we need to perhaps take a step back and look at the big picture. So for the last 200 years, our capitalist democratic system, by many traditional measures, has been hugely successful. But the problem is this technological advancement that has underpinned this progress, in quotes, has created this imbalance. So around 200 years ago, you could argue that we had a reasonably good balance between the sort of the free market, the sort of capitalist sort of corporate world, and government and community. But the technological revolution over the last 200 years, the centralization of power, control, this sort of global scale disintermediation, has created this fundamental imbalance. And many people believe this imbalance is causing some of the systemic problems, such as the environmental breakdown, the rise of populist nationalism, and growing inequality, which we don't seem to be able to stop. If you want to learn more about this thinking, there's an awesome book, The Third Pillar, Raghuram Rajan. Really good read. And of course, in New Zealand, we're not immune to all this stuff. We're having problems, with basic needs being met, but we're also being faced by this sort of silent pandemic around sort of mental health issues. So how do we solve this problem in our current system? Generally, we use this top-down charity-based approach, either via our governments using a multitude of tax-funded agencies, or a multitude of charities, philanthropic organisations. But there are significant problems with this top-down charity model. So this is the Johnson family, not their real name. They are in fact a real family in West Auckland, and they were studied over a 2-week period, who they interacted with over that 2-week period in 2017. And it turns out there are a lot of organisations they interact with. I forget the number, but it's a lot. And these organisations were here to help, and how they help is generally controlling funds and making decisions that affect the Johnsons. But there's a few problems with this fragmented model. The lack of trust, a lack of useful information, it's hard to measure outcomes. But ultimately the core problem is the folk at the bottom feel disempowered. They don't have control of their own destiny. Another problem with the sort of welfare charity space, it tends to be not particularly efficient. This is one stat from the US. From what I'm hearing from people in the industry, it's probably a lot higher than that. A small percentage actually goes to people in need. But more fundamentally, the act of charity can create this resentment by reinforcing the power dynamics between the have and the have-nots. So how do we correct this imbalance? Because unsurprisingly, the people sort of on the left-hand side of this aren't so keen to give up their power and control. So we need a new approach, something that will fundamentally change this imbalance. So what I'm going to jump into is a few solution spaces, which I hope towards the end you will see how we can bring them together in a sort of potential solution to this big problem. So a growing number of people believe that the current system around sort of well-being doesn't put enough emphasis on holistic well-being. But we now know the science, the research is telling us quite clearly that well-being, human well-being, is much more than our basic needs being met. It's also about things like being in nature, empowerment, autonomy, having purpose, having hope, human relationships, and building communities are at the heart of well-being. This is an awesome book. If you want to do some reading, Lost Connections, which kind of really sort of brings that story, really explains it very well. So imagine if we could use technology to help build strong and resilient communities that support well-being. Okay, hold that thought. So solution space 2, localization. A lady called Ellen Ostrom was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Economics a few years ago on her work on commons management. So the commons are those things that we all own together, that are neither privately owned nor managed by the government on our behalf. So no one has exclusive rights to them. Some are quite large scale and abstract, such as language, the air we breathe, our culture. Others are more local and more tangible, like a stream between my land and your land, a forest, river, fishing rights, etc., etc. And of course, this now quite common term around the tragedy of the commons is this situation in a shared resource system where individual users acting independently according to their own self-interest behave contrary to the common good of all users by depleting or spoiling shared resources through their collective action. So our current political paradigm is sceptical of the commons. It kind of takes the approach, if nobody takes responsibility for something, it will inevitably be abused. So it either needs to be in private hands or run by public institutions. So essentially what Eleanor did was to ask the question, without top-down regulation, are there conditions under which the tragedy of the commons can be avoided? And it turns out there were. After many years of research across many countries all across the world, including New Zealand, she studied successful commons management systems around the world and defined a set of 8 principles for successful commons management. So number 1, commons need to have clearly defined boundaries. In particular, who is entitled to access what. So unless there's specified community of benefit, it just becomes a free-for-all, and that's not how commons work. Number 2, rules should fit local circumstances. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to commons resource management. Rules should be dictated by local people and local needs. Number 3, participatory decision-making is vital. There are all kinds of ways to make this happen, but people will be more likely to follow the rules if they had a hand in writing them. So this is about decentralised decision-making. Number 4, commons must be monitored. So once rules have been set, communities need a way of checking that people are keeping to them. Commons don't run on goodwill, but on accountability. Number 5, sanctions for those who abuse the commons should be graduated. So Ostrom observed that the commons that worked the best didn't ban people who broke the rules. They tended to create a resentment. Instead, they had systems of warnings and fines, as well as informal reputational consequences in the community. Number 6, conflict resolution should be easily accessible. When issues come up, resolving them should be informal, cheap and straightforward. That means that anyone can take their problems of mediation and nobody is shut out. Problems are solved rather than ignoring them because nobody wants to pay legal fees. Number 7, commons need the right to organise. Your commons rules won't count for anything if a higher local authority doesn't recognise them as legitimate. Number 8, commons work best when nested within larger networks. So some things can be managed locally, but some things need wider regional cooperation. For example, an irrigation network might depend on a river that others also draw on upstream. But one of her most fundamental quotes, which really sort of sums this up, there's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot, who have the strongest incentive to get the solution right. So a lot of this is about localization. So imagine if we could apply Ostrom's principles to protecting a new type of common. Instead of a field or a river between me and you, a well-being common. So well-being is something that as a small community we all benefit if we can increase our community well-being. If we saw that as a common, could we apply Ostrom's principles to protect and nurture that common? Right, solution space 3, so hold that thought. Reimagining money. So money is this social construct. We invented it because it was better than bartering. Our current system of money in New Zealand, NZ dollar, has its strength in its universality and its liquidity, and it's vital in a functioning economy within a global ecosystem. But if we pause for a moment, we realise that money, whilst vital at a national level, is at a local level actually quite a blunt, coarse, inflexible instrument that doesn't support much of what people actually value: relationships, well-being, freedom and creativity. So if money is simply a social construct, could we construct something new that is better aligned to what we actually value? What have we thought of, for example, money as something else, a unit system to facilitate collaboration in a community and increase human well-being? These new forms of money, which you can think of kind of as a local purpose-driven token, could be designed to complement our national currency, not replace it. And for many years throughout New Zealand and throughout the world, time banks, mutual credit systems, local exchange trading systems have tried to address these issues with new types of token. These are running all over New Zealand, but they have struggled to get mainstream adoption and scale beyond small communities. But we now actually have some alternative tools. So blockchain and other decentralization technologies. You may have heard of Bitcoin, but this is the sort of technology that underpins Bitcoin. It's not actually Bitcoin. These architectures now and these new ideas and projects now allows us to create new forms of digital programmable value transfer, new forms of money, programmable money, that are independent of state and independent of corporate control. So, and token economics, which is this wonderful intersection of governance, sort of making decisions, and game theory, allows us to hard code or to create new and exciting incentive mechanisms into our tokens. And new crypto-economic primitives, as they're known, such as token bonding curves, curation markets, quadratic funding, conviction voting, now give us really exciting new tools to experiment with. We can also start to measure and track things not possible before. So we can now create programmable money. So money that can, for example, only be spent in one place, money that loses its value by X% a month, or money that can only be spent by 5 people in the community say so, only be spent if my Fitbit says I've walked 2,000 steps. It's really only limited by our imagination. But also we can now have the tools to easily convert between these tokens into local currency and back, and between tokens, sort of one-click conversion, which was really hard to do, and one of the reasons that I think time banks and prior systems struggle to scale. And of course, tokens can also be used not just to measure sort of monetary value, but reputation, impact. It's really only limited by imagination. So imagine if we could create a better form of money, easier to use than physical cash, which is disappearing, and each transaction supports our local community, and economic incentives align with community values and well-being. Okay, solution space 3, reinventing organisations. So over the last decade, there's been a lot of work into how we can better organise ourselves for a world of rapid change and uncertainty. And these 2 books came out a few years ago and really studied organisations around the world who were doing things very differently. And really this is the shift from, on the left-hand side, we've got the left-hand, the default model, profit-driven organisations, and who are deeply hierarchical, They feature a lot of control, planning, privacy, etc., to a more open, purpose-driven, decentralized type of entity. And these books really, showed us that this can work. But what's happened more recently is blockchain and the technology that underpins that has given rise to a new type of organization that really allows these types of organizations to grow and to exist and scale much easier. So a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, a boardless, open, transparent organization that aims to most efficiently achieve a set of purpose-driven goals through the use of independent agents driven by incentive mechanisms. And so these organizations, communities, where the business rules, for example, reputation management, treasury control, voting, governance, are encoded in these transparent, immutable, community-controlled business rules. And one of the key reasons that this is actually important is there was this fascinating paper in 1937 by a guy called Ronald Coase. He looked at, he asked the question, if markets are so good at directing resources, why do companies exist? And actually, he concluded that companies, firms, exist because the cost of transaction within an organisation is less than the cost of dealing with lots of people outside that organisational trust boundary. So you can imagine if I'm a CEO of a company and I want to build a website, if I've got a bunch of web developers employed by me, I can just tell them to do that. If I don't, I have to deal with the free market. I have to negotiate. I have to find web developers and blah, blah, blah. And that's a friction, a cost. So that's why organizations exist. It's cheaper if you employ people. But if we can automate, and what blockchain does is allows us to automate those sort of cross-boundary transactions, and then the whole value of the firm changes over a free market, and the line blurs between the market and the firm. So we can now organize ourselves more decentrally without a ruler. More sort of meritocratic participants engaged through pure economic incentives instead of orders. So DAOs give us a new way to start organising ourselves. So imagine if we could create a community-based governance system that allowed communities to easily and were incentivised to allocate resources to wellbeing initiatives. So we can create sort of local community-based DAOs. So if we bring all those sort of solution spaces together, that's really what the Wellbeing Protocol is all about. We want to start a movement to correct the power imbalance between the three pillars of society. I give community more power. So we want to do that by building a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, to build and support the financial and governance tools to empower communities to increase well-being, by education, identifying needs, solving problems, and providing support. So that still sounds a bit abstract and difficult to get your head around. So what we've done is just to sort of try and illustrate this with some screens that show how one part of it might work, just to sort of get the concept across. So let's go back to the Johnsons. The Johnsons live in a community of people physically close to them, say Cannons Creek in Poirot near Wellington, perhaps the same suburb. So we want to introduce a local digital currency that can only be used within that community. Let's call it the Creek coin or Cannons coin for the Cannons Creek community. And this currency would be super easy to use. We'll love QR codes and cameras now, so I hold my camera to your QR code and I can just give you 5 cannons. But we also make it super easy to convert between cannons and NZ dollar. So everybody's got the choice to be in the Cannon coin community and hold value in there. Building on the decades of work in the time bank space, we incentivize trading of time and local products. So the benefits are this helps to unlock some of the skills and potential within the community, encourages new forms of work, more empowerment and more autonomous work, and it becomes more reactive to the needs of the community. So something needs to be done. It's very easy for the community to identify that and try and fill those gaps, and it supports the local economy. We want to make it super easy for people to physically get together. We know that that's one of the most important bits. We all spend too much time in front of screens. We want to have real events and use it to get people together. We want to incentivise local data capture, and this is quite a core part of the philosophy. So how we might do that, for example, every month, everybody in the community is asked to fill out a 30-second wellbeing and key challenges questionnaire. They might be paid to do this via a few tokens, and the app might nag them if they don't do it. This data is anonymized and summarized in the app, so the data is for the community, owned by the community. So this data can then be used. So it may be that data illustrates that there's a problem with damp houses in the community, or alcoholism, or something. That might come through in some of this data, but then the community has that information and can use that to make good decisions. We can do things like create a community fund. So various transactions fees could be automatically fed into the community wellbeing fund, and then a proposal governance system within the app allows anybody in the community to propose and vote on projects that will support community wellbeing. So that's an example of that. And this is where it also gets really interesting. So remember all those agencies, charities, philanthropists who want to help disadvantaged people. The community can, if they choose, to invite any of those organisations to look at their data, their wellbeing key challenges data, and submit a proposal that could include funding or co-funding wellbeing initiatives. So, for example, a government agency like the Health Promotion Agency, they might look at the anonymised data and realise that alcohol abuse is especially prevalent in this community, so they might put a proposal to the community to fund education seminars on alcohol abuse, where the community are paid in canons to attend. And of course, the community can decide to accept this proposal or not. Let's imagine a food bank charity. So they might look at the data and realise there's a problem where food bank isn't getting to the right people. So they might work with a couple of the active community members to solve this problem by creating a proposal to set out and co-fund a new food distribution system to the people in need. Or let's imagine a local or a philanthropist, or just a reasonably well-off person in a nearby suburb who kind of a little bit sick of just signing checks to charity, wants to make a real difference, get more involved. They might look at the data and realise there's a problem with damp houses. They might connect with a few of the community and set about trying to solve that problem and co-fund that. Again, that goes into the proposal system, gets voted by the community. So that's kind of where we're at. We've finished the GovTech Accelerator program. We've got support from Victoria University, NEC, Wesley, Natita. United Nations are interested and really following us quite closely. We've now had the go-ahead to run a short pilot in Cannons Creek, which is kind of the first step in validating some of the assumptions around how people would use a local token. So we're going forwards, and we're really looking to build up a community of people who want to make this happen. So please do drop us a line. If you want to get involved, this is an open source project, radical transparency. We'll be sharing everything we learn with others, but we're really looking to try and grow grow a number of people who can contribute in any way, whether it's financial, whether it's in time, in resource, in reputational alignment, etc., etc. So please do drop us a line. Okay, thank you.